Death or prison are the usual outcomes of a life spent in the American mafia. Murder is almost an occupational hazard in a never-ending battle for illegal wealth and power. Mafia hits, vicious assassins, and some of the most horrific murderers in history have all served to highlight the violent nature of this particular American institution since the early days of organized crime. In a world where violence is practically second nature, these are some of the most brutal killers and gruesome murders associated with the mafia. This short list includes a well-known mob figure, while another was not even in the mafia but angered the wrong people. Either way, there's no doubt about the lesson. Avoid the mob, and above all, don't provoke a mobster. Born in 1942 in Brooklyn, Roy DeMeo came from a working-class Italian immigrant family. DeMeo quickly immersed himself in organized crime. He joined the Gambino family at a lowly position and worked his way up, eventually organizing his own team and perfecting his trademark style of execution. It was called the Gemini method and left victims so mutilated that there was no way to identify them. Roy DeMeo was managing a small-scale loan shark business full-time by the time he was 17 years old. Anthony Gaggi, a member of the Gambino family, took notice of this. Gaggi went over to DeMeo and told him he'd make even more money with the loan sharking business if he worked for the Gambinos directly, and so DeMeo did just that. In the late 1960s, DeMeo was forming his own gang on the side as he and Gaggi were expanding the loan shark business. The DeMeo crew, as they would later be called, began mainly as a car theft and drug trafficking operation. To expand their business, DeMeo and his group stole from credit unions and discovered profitable ways to launder money. Andre Katz, one of DeMeo's accomplices in a car theft ring, went to the Brooklyn District Attorney's office in the 1970s to give them information on the DeMeo crew. This resulted in Katz's kidnapping in 1975. It was the DeMeo crew's first documented murder. Along with notorious hitman Richard Kuklinski, the group was accused of killing at least 100 individuals between then and 1983. It was estimated that Roy DeMeo himself killed about 70 people. Roy DeMeo developed a particular technique for handling murders in order to kill frequently without being discovered. The majority of the murders occurred at the crew's well-liked hangout, the Gemini Lounge, hence the name of the process, the Gemini method. A crew member used a side door of the club to lure that day's murder victim to carry out the Gemini method. After that, the victim would be brought to the club's back room. That was when a second crew member would show up holding a towel and a silenced firearm. After shooting the victim in the head, he would cover it with a towel to prevent the blood from splattering. Subsequently, a different member would stab the victim in the heart in an attempt to stop the blood flow from the gunshot wound. After that, the victim's body would be dragged by the DeMeo crew members to a bathtub so that the remaining blood could be drained away. After the victim was bled dry, the body was dismembered and put into bags before being packed into crates and taken to the landfill. The crew members grew proficient in this ruthlessly effective technique of killing and dismembering victims, making the bodies vanish from sight. Roy DeMeo convinced Gaggi that the DeMeo crew should join forces with the Westies, an Irish-American gang, during his tenure as crew boss. DeMeo was correct, and the alliance between the Gambinos and the Westies turned out to be extremely profitable. The Gambino family now officially approved of DeMeo. However, as the 1980s approached, the FBI's investigation into the Gambino family had intensified due to a number of killings and missing persons cases connected to the Gambinos and the Gemini Club. Numerous informants were feeding tips to the police, and the FBI were routinely setting up stakeouts by the Gemini Club. The boss of the Gambino family, Paul Castellano, was rumored to have ordered a hit on Roy DeMeo in order to take the heat off. He struggled to find someone to complete the assignment, though. This was allegedly the subject of a recording that took place in a Gambino home. Roy DeMeo started to grow more suspicious around the same period. He had already avoided jail time on each of his arrests. He feared he was the target of a hit, and he was reportedly thinking about staging his own death. As it happened, his paranoia was justified. DeMeo's bullet-riddled body was discovered in the trunk of his car on January 10th, 1983, in Brooklyn. Richard Kuklinski, his former hitman, admitted to killing DeMeo in a jailhouse interview after much speculation. Joe E. Lewis was born in New York City on January 12, 1902, to Russian Jewish immigrants. When he was older, he added the E to his name to distinguish himself from the boxer. After 2 years of high school, 15-year-old Joe dropped out of DeWitt Clinton High School to join the Marine Corps, only to be discovered and released. In 1923, he became interested in vaudeville and third-rate burlesque. He rose to fame during the 1920s and 1930s as a nightclub performer, appearing at Chicago's Green Mill nightclub at 4802 North Broadway, and was renowned for his smooth singing voice and clever comedic timing. Lewis gained notoriety for his performances during the Prohibition era, where he entertained audiences with his unique blend of humor and song. His smooth vocal stylings earned him the nickname the Silver Voice Songster. He became particularly well known for his renditions of popular songs of the time, often infused with his own comedic twists. All was going well until he decided not to renew his contract at Chicago's Green Mill nightclub because he accepted a much more lucrative offer to appear at the Rendezvous Cafe. He was making $650 a week at the Green Mill and was being offered $1,000 a week plus a percentage of the cover charges. Why was this a problem? Al Capone owned a piece of the Green Mill, and the Rendezvous was controlled by a competing gang operation. Jack McGurn, who was an associate of Capone's thanks to his determination in tracking down and killing his victims, and part owner of the Green Mill Club, warned Joe that he should not take the job or else he would never live to open at the new Rendezvous. Joe told him he would easily find somebody to replace him, but McGurn was insistent. Club manager Danny Cohen gave McGurn money to persuade comedian-singer Joe E. Lewis not to move his act south to the rival New Rendezvous Cafe, situated at North Clark Street and West Diversey Parkway. Joe took the job anyway. He would leave his hotel every day nervously expecting to get whacked and even had a bodyguard protecting him for a while. Slowly he began to think that McGurn was bluffing as he did his opening night at the New Rendezvous Cafe without a hitch. McGurn one day caught up with him and told him how the Green Mill was a morgue without him. The attack on Joe did come, and it came in November 1927. He was sleeping when a knock came at his hotel room door. He was living at the Commonwealth Hotel at the time. With sleep still in his eyes, he opened the door of his suite, totally forgetting about the threats McGurn had made in the past. 3 hoodlums pushed into his room. He was warned not to scream. One grabbed a hold of Lewis while the other 2 began to pistol whip him on the head with their gun butts, one with a .45 and the other with a .38. They pounded so hard that pieces of bone from his skull entered his brain. While still holding him up, the 3rd hoodlum took out a long hunting knife and proceeded to carve his face. He began at the left ear and went under his throat. He took a piece of his tongue off. Blood began to gush out as Lewis made gurgling noises. Lewis inevitably passed out. The hoodlums left him for dead. Lewis amazingly crawled from his apartment into the hallway. At first, the chambermaid who knew him thought it was a joke, knowing stunts done by Joe in the past. Finally, he was rescued by ambulance and taken to the hospital. The killers who botched up the hit were supposedly killed. This may be just lore. Lewis took a couple of years to learn how to speak and regain his confidence. After many disappointing appearances, he left his burlesque vaudevillian singing and stuck with stand-up comedy. He flourished in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, appearing frequently in Las Vegas and hanging around with people like Milton Berle, Red Skelton, and Frank Sinatra. Lewis had mentioned many years later that it was Jack McGurn who indeed attacked him in 1927. Frank Sinatra starred in a movie based on his life called The Joker is Wild. The movie was based on a book of the same name authored by Art Cohn. Joe was a heavy drinker, gambler, and smoker. He died in 1971 from a stroke and was buried in Cedar Park Cemetery, Emerson, New Jersey. In 1952, menswear salesman and amateur detective Arnold Schuster caught the eye of the American public for a month. It was the last month of his life. Willie, the actor Sutton, had escaped from Philadelphia County Jail in February of that year while posing as a jail guard. Sutton, who was an embarrassment to the FBI and police and was becoming a folk legend in New York, had made his 3rd escape. Sutton was a seasoned bank robber who was on the run and had never injured a person in his life. Investigators wanted to take advantage of his reputation as a clothes horse and gentleman, which earned him the title of 11th most wanted fugitive in the United States. Willie Sutton's image appeared on the covers of every American crime magazine. The authorities sought to make him the most well-known figure in New York. Brooklyn police distributed pictures of the fugitive by going to every menswear store in the borough. At the time, Sutton was hiding in Brooklyn, growing a thick mustache and becoming unrecognizable as he went about the city, until the afternoon of February 18th. Arnold Schuster headed to his clothing job by taking the subway. Arnold, who had been in the Coast Guard and had grown up listening to daring tales on the radio and reading comic books, felt like he needed more in life than a boring job. While traveling to work, he was lost in thought and oblivious to the world around him when he noticed the man sitting across from him in the subway car. There was something familiar about his face. Incredibly familiar. Arnold kept getting the nagging feeling that he had seen this man before, and it finally clicked as the man got up to exit the subway car. He was seated across the aisle from Willie Sutton, the well-known bank robber. Arnold trailed the robber down 3rd Avenue after Sutton got out of the car. After walking to a gas station, Sutton got into a car. He tried to start it, but he had no luck. He asked an attendant if he could get a jump as the battery was dead. Soon Sutton would be gone, and Arnold would have missed his big break. Arnold stumbled across 2 police officers as he turned the corner. He said, "You'll probably think I'm crazy, but I just saw Willie Sutton." Officers Donald Shea and Joseph McClellan sighed and strolled around the corner where they came face to face with the most wanted man in America. "Are you Willie Sutton?" the officers asked the man at the gas station. "Of course not," replied Willie Sutton, always good-naturedly. "My name is Gordon." "Ah, okay," said the patrolman as they wished Willie Sutton a good day and walked on. From a block away, Arnold Schuster saw the exchange and shook his head. He could have sworn that was Willie Sutton, laughing as he walked to work. Obviously, he had to have the wrong guy. Back at the station, the 2 patrol officers had a good laugh and shared the story of the crime-busting citizen with their superior, Detective Louis Weiner, who thought a little more of the encounter. That night, while listening to the radio, Arnold Schuster heard the breaking news that fugitive bank robber Willie Sutton had been apprehended by hero police officers Shea, McClellan, and Weiner. Earlier in the day, the 3 officers had thought it over and brought Mr. Gordon down to the station for a talk. Sutton denied his identity right up until they had him in the interrogation room, where he finally congratulated the officers on capturing Willie Sutton. Arnold Schuster was left out in the cold, while the other 3 detectives were all set to get promotions. He went to the papers and explained his role to them. The police commissioner, George Monahan, was then approached by reporters with the story, and he promptly apologized and gave Arnold a slice of the celebratory cake that was being passed around the police station. "I want publicly to commend Arnold Schuster for the great help he gave the police force in ridding the land of one of its most notorious criminals," Monahan said. "If all citizens would give such help, it would make our burden easier." Arnold's photos were soon plastered all over the front pages of newspapers. Radio stations interviewed him, and he was reportedly a guest on the television program, I've Got a Secret. But when Arnold contacted the authorities to claim his reward, he discovered there was none. Arnold Schuster made $750 for a few television appearances, while the cops who hauled in Willie Sutton were promoted, and the reporters who wrote about him sold newspapers. But of course there was the fame. Over the course of the week, Arnold Schuster was the toast of New York, and legend has it that Albert Anastasia grew tired of seeing Arnold on television. "I can't stand squealers," he was reported to say, ordering the hit of the young menswear salesman from Queens. Anastasia had nothing to do with Willie Sutton. He never employed the man, never worked with him, and he never even met Arnold Schuster. He simply felt that the roles of police and criminals were established and that the little guy had no part of their game. Anastasia was really off his rocker, Lucy Luciano said later. He was starting to see himself like some guy in the old gangster movies. But off his rocker or not, he still led Murder, Inc., the enforcement arm of the mob, and his will was law. Arnold Schuster walked home from his job at his father's menswear store on the evening of Saturday, March 8, 1952. He was heading to the front door. It was dark. He was exhausted. He had his keys out. Gangbusters was playing on radios all around the neighborhood when the neighbors heard gunfire at 9:10 p.m. Arnold Schuster was already dead on the sidewalk when they ran outside. 2 rounds hit his groin and a round went through each of his eyes. His death was a huge statement to the public. Outrage poured from all parts of society right away. This murder, above any crime in my memory, was an offense against all the decent people of the city of New York, said Mayor Vincent Impellitteri. With the possible exception of the Lindbergh baby, echoed former Brooklyn prosecutor Burton Turkis. No single murder in the past 25 years has so shocked or outraged the American public. Even Willie Sutton, in prison, was taken aback by the death associated with him. He didn't know Anastasia and didn't harbor any ill will toward Arnold Schuster. He even offered to add thousands to the growing reward money, but the cops talked him out of it. It would not seem proper. Arnold's parents accused the police of failing to protect their son and the papers for making their son famous. In the end, the city and the Schusters reached a $41,000 settlement, but Arnold's murder was forgotten and no one was ever arrested. In the end, maybe Arnold should have just minded his business, but how would he have known?